There is a particular kind of man who becomes very good at being fine. Not happy necessarily, not whole, but fine, that useful, load-bearing word that covers everything from mild inconvenience to the deep, structural ache of a life lived at an angle to itself. Fine is the word you use at family dinners when your grandmother asks how you're doing. Fine is what you say to coworkers on Monday mornings. Fine is the answer you give so automatically, so reflexively, that after long enough you almost stop noticing the distance between it and the truth. My name is Noah Callahan. I am 26 years old, and for the better part of my adult life, I was one of the finest fine men you would ever meet. I had a good job, junior editor at a mid-sized publishing house in the city, the kind of work that involved a lot of manuscripts and coffee, and the particular satisfaction of helping someone else's story become what it was always trying to be. I had a small apartment with decent light and too many books, and a houseplant named Gerald who had, improbably, survived 3 years under my care. I had friends, a routine, a gym membership I used with moderate consistency, and a family who loved me with the full-throated intensity of Irish-American Midwesterners who express emotion through food and gentle interrogation. What I did not have was anyone who knew the whole truth of me. Not one person, not one single human soul who had been permitted access to the room at the center of myself that I kept, always, carefully locked. The appointment that changed everything was scheduled for a Thursday in early March. Routine physical, annual checkup, the kind of thing you put off until your insurance company sends the third reminder and you think, fine, I'll go, it'll take 40 minutes, I'll be back at my desk by lunch. I had no idea that I was walking toward the unraveling of the most carefully constructed lie of my life. Not a lie I'd told anyone else. The worst kind, the lie I'd told myself daily for years, until the telling of it had become as automatic as breathing. The clinic was called Riverside Family Health, which was a name I found mildly aspirational since it sat not beside any river, but between a dry cleaner and a parking structure on West Clement Street. I had been going there for 2 years, transferred from my previous doctor when I moved apartments, and in those 2 years I had seen Dr. Acaffer exactly twice, once for the flu, and once for a sprained wrist I'd gotten playing basketball with coworkers at a company outing. Both times he had been efficient, thorough, and professionally warm in the specific way of good doctors, the way that makes you feel attended to without making you feel examined. He had kind eyes and a calm, precise manner of speaking, and the unhurried quality of someone who gives you his full attention for the duration of your appointment, as though there is no one before you and no one after. I had not thought about him between appointments. This is a fact I want to be clear about, because the story I am about to tell you is one that could easily be misunderstood, and I want to be precise about the sequence of things. I had not thought about Dr. James Acaffer between our 2 previous visits. He was my doctor. That was the full extent of what he was to me. And then I sat down in the examination room at 10:15 on a Thursday morning in March, and he came in reading my chart and he looked up and he said, "Noah, good to see you again. How have you been?" And something shifted. I cannot explain it more precisely than that, because the honest truth is that I don't fully understand it even now. Something in the room changed. The air pressure, maybe. The quality of light. Something rearranged itself, subtly and without my permission, and I sat there on the paper-covered examination table in my regular clothes. I hadn't changed into a gown yet, and looked at him, and felt the particular dislocation of a person who has just encountered something they don't have a category for. "Fine," I said, automatic, the word of a practiced man. He looked at me for a half-second longer than strictly necessary, the way observant people sometimes do when the word and the face giving it are slightly out of alignment. "Good," he said, and sat down on the rolling stool and crossed one leg over the other with his clipboard and began the appointment. He was 31. I knew this because his medical license was framed on the wall, and I had, during our flu appointment, read it in the way you read anything that's at eye level when you have nothing else to look at. He had graduated from Johns Hopkins and done his residency here in the city, and had been at Riverside Family Health for 2 years, which meant we had arrived in our respective roles at approximately the same time, which was a symmetry I found there in the examination room, in that moment of rearrangement, oddly significant. He had a scar above his left eyebrow, thin and faded, the kind you get as a kid and carry forever. He wore his white coat over a dark green shirt. His handwriting on the clipboard was small and very neat. He asked questions and listened to the answers and typed notes into the system between questions, and I sat there answering him: blood pressure, sleep, diet, exercise, any concerning symptoms, and ran, simultaneously, a very separate and very confused interior monologue about what exactly was happening to me. "Nothing is happening to you," the rational part of my mind said firmly. "He is your doctor. You are having a routine physical. Stop it." But something else, something older and more insistent, something that had been waiting a very long time, said, "There. That's what you've been running from, right there, in the answer to the question of why you've been fine for so long." I pressed it down. I was very good at pressing things down. He asked me to breathe in and out while he listened with the stethoscope. He checked my reflexes. He looked in my ears and my throat and at my eyes. He was entirely professional and I was entirely cooperative, and the whole thing lasted 38 minutes, and at the end he said he'd order some blood work, and that everything looked good, and that I should try to get more sleep. "Any questions?" he asked, as doctors do, pen hovering over the clipboard. I had 17 questions, none of which I was going to ask. "No," I said, "thank you." He smiled, brief, genuine, the smile of a busy man who is nonetheless present, and said, "Take care of yourself, Noah," and left. I sat in the examination room for an extra 30 seconds after the door closed. Then I got my jacket, scheduled my blood work at the front desk, and walked out into the cool March air and stood on West Clement Street between the dry cleaner and the parking structure and thought, what on earth was that? The answer, of course, the one I kept not arriving at, not quite, circling it the way you circle something hot, was that it was recognition. Not of him, of myself. I had known, somewhere below the threshold of what I was willing to examine, for a very long time. Since college, probably. Since before that, if I was being fully precise, which required a level of honesty I had not yet decided to offer myself. There had been moments, enough of them to form a pattern, if you were willing to see the pattern, that I had learned to explain away. The roommate sophomore year who I had thought about too much and in the wrong way, and about whom I had told myself an elaborate story involving nothing more than admiration. The friend of a friend at a party 3 years ago whose laugh had done something to my chest that I had attributed to too many drinks and the general warm confusion of a good party. The slow, steady accumulation of evidence that I had chosen, with remarkable consistency and ingenuity, not to read. I was good at this. I had been practicing for years. I had become, in fact, a world-class expert at taking evidence of myself and filing it somewhere it would never be reviewed. The blood work appointment was the following Tuesday. I went in the morning before work, gave the nurse my arm, looked at the wall and thought about nothing in particular, or tried to. Dr. Akefer called on Friday afternoon. I was at my desk editing a manuscript about migratory birds when my phone buzzed with the clinic number, and something in my chest did a complicated thing. "It's blood work results," I told myself. "It's a routine call. Calm down." "Mr. Callahan." His voice through the phone was the same as in person, unhurried, attentive. "This is Dr. Akefer calling with your blood work results." "Yes," I said. "Hi." "Most things look great," he said, and I heard the turning of a page. "Your cholesterol is excellent, blood sugar is normal, kidney function is good." A brief pause. "Your vitamin D is low, which is pretty common this time of year in this part of the country." I'd recommend a supplement. I'll send a note to the pharmacy. And your iron is slightly below normal, nothing alarming, but I'd like to talk through some dietary adjustments. Okay, I said. I could go through it on the phone, he said, but it might be easier to have a quick follow-up conversation in person. It's only about 10 minutes. Would you be open to coming in next week? I should have said yes immediately. It was a medical appointment. It was a routine follow-up about vitamin D and iron levels. There was no reason for the hesitation that lasted approximately 1 second longer than it should have. Sure, I said, that works. Thursday again, same time. Thursday works, I said. I put the phone down and looked at the manuscript open on my screen, a paragraph about Arctic terns and their extraordinary annual migration, the longest of any animal on Earth, flying from pole to pole and back again, covering 70,000 kilometers a year in a journey so immense that scientists took a long time to fully believe it was true, even after the data confirmed it. I thought about what it must be like to travel that far and still end up back where you started. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched, for the first time without immediately closing the tab, "Am I gay?" quiz. I stared at the search results for a long time. Then I closed the tab without clicking anything because I did not need a quiz. I had always known I did not need a quiz. The knowing had never been the problem. The saying was the problem. The allowing it to be real was the problem. I went back to the Arctic terns. I dressed more carefully than usual on Thursday morning, which I noted with some exasperation, and then decided to simply not examine. The follow-up appointment was brief and informative in the practical sense. Dr. Ackefer explained the dietary sources of iron I should incorporate and the dosage for the vitamin D supplement, and when he'd want to recheck my levels. He had a printed summary ready for me, which he went through methodically, and I sat in the chair across from his desk this time rather than on the examination table, which felt somehow more like a conversation and less like being assessed. Near the end of the appointment, he looked up from the summary and said, almost as an afterthought, "Can I ask, and this is entirely outside the blood work, how are you sleeping?" I blinked. "You mentioned that last time too." "I know," he said. "You said it was fine, which is why I'm asking again." His expression was straightforward, neither intrusive nor dismissive. Doctors hear "fine" a lot. Sometimes it means fine. Sometimes it means something's keeping you up and you'd rather not get into it. I looked at him. "I sleep okay," I said carefully. "How many hours?" 5, 6. "What time do you usually wake up?" 3 or 4 in the morning sometimes. Usually I go back to sleep. He nodded, making a note. "Any particular reason you wake up? Anxiety, racing thoughts?" The clinical framing of it made it somehow easier to answer honestly. "Sometimes," I said. "Racing thoughts, I guess." "Anything you want to talk through?" He said it the way good doctors say these things, an open door, no pressure to walk through it. I looked at him, at the neat handwriting on his notepad, at the scar above his left eyebrow, at the calm, attentive expression of a man who had, in 2 brief appointments and 1 phone call, somehow become the person in whose presence I found it most difficult to be fine. "No," I said, "I'm okay." He accepted this, didn't push, finished the appointment, handed me the summary sheet and walked me to the door. "Take care of yourself," he said again, as he had last time. "I will," I said. "Thank you, Dr. Ackefer." "James," he said, and then seemed to consider whether he'd said that appropriately outside the appointment, almost at the door, and offered name. "Sorry, professionally speaking, Dr. Ackefer is fine. He paused, a small and humanizing awkwardness. "Habit. I grew up in a house where everyone was on a first-name basis." I looked at him, he looked back, something flickered. "James," I said. He smiled, the full one this time, not the professional brief version, the real one, and I walked out into the March air and stood on West Clement Street and thought, I am in so much trouble. 2 weeks passed. I edited manuscripts. I made coffee. I went to the gym. I had dinner with my friend Cora on a Wednesday at the Italian place on 8th we'd been going to for 3 years, and she talked about her new apartment and I listened and contributed and was good company. And on the walk home she said, "You seem different," the way people who know you say it, not an accusation, just an observation. "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it, like you're paying more attention to something. She tilted her head. "What are you paying attention to?" "Nothing," I said. "Work." She gave me the look that meant she didn't believe me and was filing it for later. "Okay," she said. I was not paying attention to work. I was paying attention to the question that had been circling me since March, growing louder, growing less possible to root around. I was 26 years old and I had never been in a relationship, not a real one, not the kind where you are fully present and fully yourself with another person. I had dated, briefly and without much investment, women I liked and respected and felt no particular pull toward. I had ended those situations with gentle vagueness that I think, in retrospect, was kinder to me than to them. I had told myself a rotating series of stories about why I was focused on my career. I wasn't a relationship person. I was selective. I just hadn't met the right person yet. I had met the right kind of person. Twice, maybe 3 times, men who were smart and kind, and who I had been interested in and from whom I had retreated so automatically that I was back at a safe distance before I'd even consciously made the decision to move. This is what it looks like from the inside when you are afraid of yourself. Not dramatic, not explosive, just this, a series of quiet retreats so practiced they barely register. One evening in mid-March I was editing a memoir, a young woman's account of leaving a fundamentalist community and reconstructing her identity in the aftermath. And I came to a passage where she described the moment she first said a true thing about herself out loud. Not the full truth, just a fragment of it. One sentence to one trusted person. And she wrote about the way her body felt in the moment of saying it, like something had been released that she hadn't known she was clenching. And how, simultaneously, she had been terrified, and how the terror and the release had coexisted exactly, each one real, neither one canceling the other. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I sat at my desk with the manuscript open and my editor's pen uncapped and wrote nothing for several minutes. And something in my chest worked quietly at whatever had been welded shut there. And I thought about a doctor on West Clement Street who had offered me his first name and smiled the real smile and said, "Take care of yourself," and meant it. I thought about the Arctic terns and their 70,000 kilometers. I thought, enough. I went back to the clinic without an appointment. This is, I want to be clear, not something I had planned. I had not decided, on any conscious level, to return to Riverside Family Health on a Tuesday afternoon in late March with no medical reason, and no strategy, and nothing, but the mildly reckless energy of a person who has been holding their breath for years and has finally decided to breathe. I was standing outside afterward thinking, what did I just do? Which tells you something about the depth of my planning. What I did was, I walked in, checked in at the front desk, and said I didn't have an appointment but I wanted to ask whether Dr. Acaffer had any availability for a brief follow-up about my blood work. The receptionist, a kind woman named Patricia who had worked there for 15 years and had the calm authority of someone who had seen everything, checked the schedule, and said he had a slot in 45 minutes if I wanted to wait. I waited. I read a magazine about home renovation without absorbing any of it. I thought about leaving 4 times. I stayed. When James came into the consultation room, he looked briefly surprised, a small recalibration of his expression, and then settled. "Noah," he said, "I didn't see you on the schedule." "I know, I'm sorry, I should have called." I paused. "I can reschedule if." "No, it's fine, you're here." He sat down, crossed his arms lightly, the posture of someone giving you his full attention. "What's going on?" I had prepared words, a set of reasonable, medical-adjacent words about the iron levels or the sleep issues or something that could pass as a clinical reason for the visit. They were right there, ready. I did not use them. I think, I said instead, I owe you a more honest answer to the question you asked me last time, about the racing thoughts. He held my gaze very still, not guarded, not alarmed, just present. Okay, he said. There are things I've been avoiding looking at for a long time, I said. The words were coming slowly, the way words come when you are choosing them from a space where language has rarely been allowed. About myself, and I think the reason I can't sleep is that they're getting louder. The things I've been avoiding. It's getting harder too. I stopped, tried again. I don't have anyone I can say this to. I know that's not a medical issue. I know this isn't what you. Noah, he said quietly, what do you need to say? I looked at him. I think I'm gay, I said. The first time. The very first time out loud to another human being. Not I know, not yet, not with full certainty that would come later, but this, I think. A first offering, a single sentence with a door inside it. James Ackhafer did not flinch, did not shift back, did not rearrange his expression into something careful or clinical or professionally neutral. He simply looked at me with the same steady attention he always brought to everything, and something in that attention shifted, became warmer, became personal, lost the last millimeter of professional distance. Thank you for trusting me with that, he said, quietly, sincerely. My hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. Sorry, I said. I've never said that to anyone. You don't have to apologize, he said. It's just a checkup clinic, I said, which was not really what I meant, but I was a little overwhelmed and my sentences were coming out sideways. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more careful. Yeah, he said, it is. A pause. How long have you known? I think since I was 17, I said. Maybe earlier. I've been very good at not looking at it. He nodded slowly. There was something in his expression I couldn't read, something that had moved through professional warmth into something more personal, and then further than that into something he was, visibly, deciding how to handle. Are you okay? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I will be. I think saying it is the first part of being okay. I looked at him. I'm sorry, this is probably deeply unprofessional of me. You're my doctor. He was quiet for a moment. I am your doctor, he said carefully. And because of that, there are things I can't, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to. He stopped, looked at the surface of the desk for a moment, then back at me. I want you to know that I hear you, that what you just shared takes courage and it matters. And I want you to have support for this. I can refer you to a counselor who works specifically with. James, I said. He stopped. I know what you're doing, I said. The professional pivot. I took a breath. I didn't come here to make things complicated for you. I think I came here because you're the only person I've ever been able to see clearly around, and I needed to say this somewhere, and you were the somewhere. He was very still. That's the most honest thing I've said in years, I added quieter. The room was absolutely silent except for the distant sound of the clinic around us, the murmured conversation at the front desk, the soft electronic beep of something far down the hall. James looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, not the doctor's expression, not the careful professional warmth. Something else. Something that lived underneath all of that. Noah, he said slowly, I'm going to give you a referral to an excellent counselor, and I'm going to recommend that going forward you see one of my colleagues at the practice. He held my gaze, because I don't think I can be both your doctor and, he stopped. And what? I said. A long pause. I don't think it would be professional of me to finish that sentence, he said, while you're still my patient. Something moved through me, warm and complicated and terrifying, and also, underneath all of that, something that felt unmistakably like hope. I called the clinic the next day and requested a transfer to Dr. Patel, James's colleague, for all future medical care. Patricia, the receptionist, processed this with full professional equanimity and sent me the paperwork. I also called the counselor James had referred me to, Dr. Sandra Weiss, who worked out of a calm, book-lined office on the fourth floor of a building 6 blocks from my apartment, and made an appointment for the following week. Both of these actions scared me. Both of them felt, underneath the fear, like the right direction. Dr. Weiss was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-50s who had the manner of someone who had heard every possible human story and found all of them interesting. She asked me why I'd come in, and I told her, and her expression didn't change by a single degree, which I found immediately comforting. "Tell me about what finally brought you here," she said. I thought about it honestly. "A checkup," I said. "A routine appointment." The doctor asked how I was doing, and something about the way he asked it, I paused. I couldn't give the automatic answer. "What's the automatic answer?" "Fine." She nodded slowly, the nod of someone who recognizes something well. "How long have you been giving the automatic answer?" "Most of my adult life," I said, "probably longer." "And underneath it?" I looked at my hands. "A person who's been keeping something from himself for a long time," I said, "and running out of the energy to keep keeping it." She smiled, brief and real. "That's a good place to start." We met every Tuesday for the weeks that followed, and I said things I had never said to anyone, in the careful, non-judgmental container of that office. And each week I walked out feeling simultaneously more exhausted and more like myself. Like the process of removing weight was tiring in its own way, but the direction of it was toward something real. In April, I told Cora. We were at the Italian place again. I had become incapable of telling the truth anywhere other than restaurants, apparently, which my therapist found moderately amusing. And I was halfway through a bowl of pasta when I set my fork down and said, "I need to tell you something." Cora put her own fork down. She had been waiting for this, I could see it on her face. "You seem different," she'd said in March. She had been waiting since March. "I'm gay," I said, second time I'd said it, easier than the first, still enormous. Cora looked at me across the small table with the candle between us, and her eyes were immediately, completely full of tears. "Noah," she said. "Don't cry," I said, which was too late. I'm happy," she said, pressing her hand to her mouth. "I'm so happy you told me. How long have you?" "Forever," I said, "a long time." "You should have told me sooner," she said, and then, "No, I know you told me when you could, I know." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand and held it. "I love you so much. You know that. Absolutely nothing changes." "I know," I said. "Does anyone else know?" "My therapist," I said, and I paused. "Someone else, sort of." She raised an eyebrow, "Sort of." "It's complicated," I said. She looked at me with the specific intensity of a woman who has been my best friend for 6 years, and can tell when there is a story beneath the story. "Tell me everything," she said, and signaled for more wine. I did not see James for 6 weeks after the appointment. He was not my doctor anymore. I had no reason to go to the clinic. I was not a person who manufactured reasons to go places. I had too much self-awareness for that, and Dr. Weiss would have had notes. But I thought about him with a regularity that I had, by this point, given up trying to manage. I thought about the way he looked up from a chart. The real smile versus the professional one. The scar above his left eyebrow. The careful, deliberate way he had not finished that sentence. "I don't think I can be both your doctor and what that unfinished sentence contained. I also thought, with clear eyes for the first time, about myself. This was new. I had spent years avoiding looking at myself directly, and now I was in the practice of it, doing it regularly in Dr. Weiss's office and increasingly outside of it, looking at the patterns, understanding the architecture of the avoidance, beginning the slow work of deciding who I wanted to be on the other side of the locked room. It was not comfortable work. It was not linear. There were weeks where I felt I was making genuine progress, and then a dinner at my parents' house, where I sat at the familiar kitchen table and felt the old weight settle back over me and wondered if I would ever be able to say it there, in that kitchen, to those people who loved me and whom I feared disappointing. I was not ready yet for that particular conversation. Dr. Weiss and I talked about the difference between being ready and being safe, about timing, about the fact that coming out was not a single event but an ongoing, recursive process. You came out to yourself, and then one person, and then another, and then perhaps your family, and then perhaps the world, and there was no deadline and no correct order, and the only timing that mattered was yours. I was building toward it. I could feel myself building. In late April, I went to a community center event, a reading and discussion hosted by an LGBTQ plus literary group, which I had found online and circled for 3 weeks before attending. It was a small room, 20 or so people, and they were discussing a novel I had actually edited 2 years ago under a pseudonym, which produced a surreal experience of hearing strangers discuss your work without knowing you did it. I sat in the back row and listened, and afterward, a man named Theo, tall, glasses, a university scarf he hadn't taken off despite the warm room, struck up a conversation with me about the novel, and we talked for an hour about books and identity and the particular experience of encountering a story that makes you feel seen. And when I walked home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in a social setting, fully present, fully there. Not managing, not performing, just in the room being myself. I texted Dr. Weiss's office to tell her at our next session. She said, "That's significant." In the measured, precise way, she said things that were actually quite large. I went back to the literary group the following month. It was Cora who arranged it, which I want to be clear about because I would not have done it myself. Not out of cowardice, or not only out of cowardice, but out of the firm belief that some things should not be engineered. Some things should arrive on their own terms. She did not tell me she'd arranged it. This is the kind of friend Cora is. She texted me on a Saturday in May and said she was meeting a few people for coffee at the place on Morrison, the one with the good light and the communal tables, and did I want to come? And I said yes, because it was a Saturday and I had no plans and the manuscript I was supposed to be reading could wait. I arrived to find Cora at a corner table with two people I didn't know. One of them was James Akefer. I stopped in the doorway of the coffee shop. Several cinematic things occurred simultaneously. Cora's expression of elaborately unconvincing surprise, James's expression of what appeared to be genuine surprise that was complicated by something that might have been relief, and my own expression of I don't know. I have no idea what I looked like. I was too busy being inside the moment to observe it. Cora stood and hugged me and said, "James and I know each other from the hospital fundraiser board. I thought I mentioned that." She had not mentioned that. "Sit down, we saved you a seat." I sat down across from James in a coffee shop on a Saturday in May. He was in regular clothes, dark jeans and a navy blue sweater, no white coat, no clipboard. He looked different outside the clinic, more relaxed somehow. Less composed in a way that was actually more appealing, because the composure I could see now was partly professional armor, and underneath it was a person who was capable of uncertainty, of awkwardness, of sitting across from someone in a coffee shop and not quite knowing what to do with his face. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he said. Cora and the third person at the table, a woman named Bry who was a mutual friend of Cora's and James's, and who seemed to understand she was the cover story, began a conversation with each other that was clearly designed to give James and me space. Cora is very good at this. She had clearly put some thought into the logistics. "Cora's subtle," I said to James. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that shows up in your eyes first. "About as subtle as a construction site," he agreed. "She means well." "I know she does." He paused. His hands were around a coffee cup, and he was looking at me with the look I'd always found difficult, the attentive one, the one that listened. "How are you?" he asked. Not a professional question this time, just the question. "Better," I said. "Genuinely better. I've been seeing a counselor, the one you referred me to." Something in his expression opened slightly. "Dr. Weiss. She's incredible." "I know," he said. "I've referred several patients to her." He paused. "I'm glad you called her." "So am I." I looked at my coffee. I've been doing the work," I said. "The stuff I've been avoiding for years, I'm doing it." "How does that feel?" "Like removing something very heavy from a very small apartment," I said. "Exhausting, but the apartment is much nicer afterward." He smiled, the real one. We talked for 2 hours. Cora and Bry orbited in and out of the conversation, sometimes joining, sometimes retreating back into their own, and James and I talked about books. He read more than I expected, thoughtful and eclectic choices, and about his work and my work, about the city, about where we were both from, about small things and larger things in the easy, accumulating way of two people discovering they have more in common than the context in which they met. I learned that he had grown up in Atlanta, moved north for medical school, that he had 2 sisters and a brother and a large, loud, affectionate extended family in Ghana, that he had been in the city for 2 years and was still, in some ways, finding his footing, that he made very good jollof rice and terrible baked goods and had strong opinions about the city's coffee shops. I told him about Gerald the houseplant and the Arctic turns in the memoir and the literary group I'd started attending. He listened to all of it with the full, genuine attention that I was beginning to understand, simply who he was, not a professional skill, but a quality of character. As we were leaving, the coffee shop beginning to fill with the Saturday afternoon crowd, Cora and Bry conveniently needing to be somewhere else together in a coordinated exit that had clearly been planned in advance, James and I stood on the sidewalk, and the warm May air moved between us. "I'm glad Cora's subtle," he said. "Me too," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Can I call you?" he asked. "Not as your doctor," as he paused, choosing the word with the care of someone for whom language matters, "as someone who would like to know you better." I looked at him, at the man who had asked me twice how I was doing and meant it, who had given me his first name with an almost apologetic honesty, who had left a sentence unfinished in a consultation room in March, because he was too careful and too principled to finish it under the wrong circumstances, and who had now, on a sidewalk in May, asked the simplest possible version of the true question. "Yes," I said. He called on a Tuesday evening. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes, which I know because I glanced at the clock when I finally set my phone down and was mildly astonished. He called again on Thursday. We talked about his family's house in Atlanta and the architecture of old Southern homes that he'd loved as a kid, the wide porches, the emphasis on shared outdoor space, the way buildings could encode values. I talked about the memoir I was editing, about the strange intimacy of spending weeks inside someone else's story, about what it did to you, made you more careful with your own narrative, more attentive to the choices you made in telling it. "Is that why you became an editor?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "Other people's stories always felt safer to be inside than my own." A brief quiet on the line. "Less safe now?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. We went to dinner in June, the kind of dinner that is clearly a date without either person needing to formally declare it, which suited us both because we were, in our different ways, people who moved carefully. A small Japanese place he'd been wanting to try, understated and warm, good sake and better food, and a conversation that moved the way conversations move when you are with someone you already know the important things about and are now learning the texture of. He told me about the path to medicine, not the linear version, the actual one, which included a year of genuine uncertainty after college about whether it was what he wanted or what was expected. and the difficult conversation with his parents when he'd considered other things, and what had ultimately brought him back to it. The moment he'd understood, in residency, watching a patient process a difficult diagnosis, that what he was most naturally built for was the act of being present with people in the hard moments, that it was less about the medicine and more about that. "You're very good at it," I said. "I have some personal experience." He smiled with his eyes first. "You made it easy," he said. "You were honest, even when you didn't mean to be." "What do you mean?" "The first appointment," he said. "I asked how you were doing and you said fine, and there was something in the way you said it, I noticed it. I don't always notice, but you said it and I thought, that's not the whole answer." "You didn't say anything," I said. "I filed it," he said. "And then the second time I saw you I asked again and you gave me the same answer and I thought," he paused, "I thought this person is carrying something, and I hoped you'd find a way to put it down eventually." A pause. "I didn't anticipate being the person you put it down in front of. That was," he seemed to be choosing words, "that was significant for me." "Significant how?" I asked. He looked at me across the table. "It mattered to me that you trusted me with it," he said simply, "more than it probably should have, given that I was your doctor." "You stopped being my doctor first," I pointed out. "I know," he said. "I'm not sure I made that decision for the most professionally pristine reasons." Something warm moved through me. "What reasons did you make it for?" "The honest ones," he said. We walked after dinner along the river. There was an actual river, unlike the clinic's aspirational name. And the June evening was warm and the city was lit, and we walked slowly the way you walk when you are not going anywhere in particular, when the destination is beside the point. At a certain moment, without discussion or planning, he reached over and took my hand. I had been waiting for it and not waiting for it simultaneously, and when it happened, warm, unhurried, sure, something in me that had been very tightly wounded for a very long time simply let go. We walked that way for a long time, not talking much, the city moving around us. My parents' house was a 40-minute drive from the city, out past the suburbs into the kind of landscape that is neither city nor country, old neighborhoods of wide streets and mature trees, houses with front porches, a hardware store that had been run by the same family for 3 generations. I had been going back and forth about timing for months. Dr. Weiss and I had talked about it at length. Cora had offered to come with me, which I had declined. It needed to be mine, just mine, the way the first telling had been mine. James had said, one evening on my apartment couch with his arm around my shoulder and Gerald visible on the windowsill behind him, "When you're ready. And if you're ready and you want me there, I'll be there." I drove out on a Sunday in September. The leaves were just beginning to turn. My mother had made too much food, as she always did when I was coming, as though love could be expressed most perfectly in the form of excess. My father had mowed the lawn specifically, which was his version of the same thing. We ate. We talked about work and the news and my sister who was finishing her master's degree in Boston. The conversation moved in the comfortable, well-worn channels of a family that has been talking to each other for 26 years and knows the rhythms. After lunch, my mother was washing dishes and my father was reading at the table, and I was sitting across from him with a mug of coffee I was not drinking, and I thought, now. "Dad," I said, "can I tell you both something?" My mother turned from the sink. My father set his paper down. They looked at me with the particular attention of parents who love their child and are, somewhere underneath the normal Sunday afternoon, always a little braced. Because loving a child means always, on some level, waiting for the moment when they need you for something real. "I'm gay," I said, third time, getting clearer each time. Like a note struck on a bell, rings truer the more it's struck. The kitchen was quiet. My mother made a sound small and sharp, the sound of someone absorbing something, and then her face did a complicated and human thing, moving through several expressions at once. Surprise, recalibration, a search through memory for things she was now seeing differently. And then this is the one I will remember, the one I will carry, a settling, a tenderness. She crossed to the table and sat beside me and took my face in both her hands the way she'd done when I was small, when I'd had a nightmare or a hard day at school, and she said, "My love." Just that, my love. My father was quiet for longer. He was a quieter person, always had been, a man who processed things internally before he offered them. He looked at the table's surface, then at me, and I could see him working through something, and I waited, and then he said, very carefully, "Have you been carrying this alone?" "For a long time," I said. He exhaled slowly. "Then I'm sorry we weren't somewhere you could bring it sooner," he said. "That's on us, on whatever in this house made you feel you couldn't." He stopped, tried again. I'm still," he stopped again, honest in his uncertainty, which was itself a form of love. "I don't fully understand everything yet, but I love you. That doesn't need understanding." It was not perfect. It was not the uncomplicated, open-armed reception of a story that has resolved itself fully. My father had work to do, understanding to build, attitudes to examine, the adjustment of a man who loves his child and is confronting the gap between that love and his preparedness for this particular truth. That work would take time. We would have more conversations. Some of them would be hard. But he said, "I love you," and he meant it, and it was real. And that was enough to begin. November, the city in autumn. Gerald had achieved what I was privately calling his fourth year, which felt like a small personal triumph. My apartment had new furniture, not much, just a reading chair I'd wanted for years and finally bought, and a print on the wall from the literary group's fundraiser, geometric and warm. Small changes. The apartment of a person who has started treating themselves like someone worth the consideration. James was there on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the couch with his legs stretched out and a book open on his chest in the way of a man who has made himself at home in a space, which he had, gradually, over the months. He had been there enough now that he had a coffee mug he used, a specific side of the couch, an opinion about where the reading chair should go that I had partially accepted and partially overruled. I was at the kitchen table with a manuscript making notes. We had been in the apartment for 2 hours without exchanging more than a handful of sentences, which had started to feel, recently, like one of the most intimate things. The capacity to be in a space with someone and simply be there, without the pressure of constant performance or connection, just the warm background hum of another person's presence. "Can I read you something?" I said. "Yeah," he said, without looking up from his book. I read him a passage from the manuscript I was working on, a novel, a quiet and careful love story about two people who find each other late in the process of becoming themselves. The passage was about the difference between being looked at and being seen. When I finished, James was quiet for a moment. "That's good," he said. "It's really good," I agreed. "The whole book is. She's been working on it for 7 years." "Some things take the time they take," he said. I looked at him. He was still looking at his book, but something in the set of his face was attending to what he'd just said as much as to what I'd read, turning it over, checking it. I thought about everything that had taken the time it had taken. The years of the locked room, the accumulation of fine, the March morning in a clinic on West Clement Street, the counselor's book-lined office, Cora and the Italian restaurant, the literary group in Theo, and the genuine presence I'd discovered was possible, my parents' kitchen table on a Sunday in September. James on my couch, on a Saturday in November, having made himself at home. I had thought for a long time that the truth about myself was something to be survived, something to be managed and contained and eventually, perhaps, carefully released. I understood now that it was not something to survive. It was the part of me that was most fully alive, the part that, once allowed to exist openly, made everything else more real. The work, the friendships, the apartment with better furniture and Gerald in the window, the love that was sitting 6 feet away with a book on its chest. "James," I said. He looked up. "Thank you," I said. He held my gaze. "For what?" "For asking twice," I said. "How I was doing, for asking twice and meaning it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the characteristic care of a man who means his words precisely, "I'll keep asking," he said, "for as long as you'll let me." Gerald sat on the windowsill in the November light, improbably alive, 4th year and counting. The manuscript was open on the table. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary, continuous way, the sound of it, the life of it always there, always ongoing. I was in it, fully finally in it. Not fine, not the useful, load-bearing, cover-everything word. Better than that. Real.